Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Women to Know series. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, Women to Know is a space and place where we listen and learn from the stories of amazing and courageous and beautiful women who have experienced something, who have journeyed through something, who have learned some lessons through that, and are willing to share with the sisterhood what they have learned so that those who are coming along in their journey can find inspiration, hope, healing, and a pathway forward. Today, my guest is Lorraine Connell, who is the owner of Peers Not Fears, LLC. Lorraine is also a leadership development coach, and I'm going to read for you right now her bio before we jump in. Here we go. Lorraine Connell is the owner of Peers Not Fears, LLC, and a veteran educator of over 20 years. As a workshop facilitator, speaker, coach, and consultant for schools and youth-serving organizations, she has developed curricula on leadership and empathy. She works in collaboration with others to provide coaching to educators and students everywhere through her company. I'm so sorry, I missed my scroll here. She works in collaboration with others to provide coaching to educators and students everywhere through her company, Peers Not Fears, LLC. Lorraine hosts the podcast Unimagined, where she interviews students, current and past, on their experiences in education and listens to their advice on how we can do better. Her work spans the impact of understanding how and where our biases come into play to develop strong communities. Lorraine, thank you so much for being a guest today. There are so many pathways that we could dive into. What I'd love to start with, though, is your experience as an educator, I'm sure has informed the creation of this organization, Peers Not Fears. And so I'd love to first hear from you what your journey in the education space was like as an educator, and how that has led to some of the professional transitions in your life.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I will start by saying that I love to teach. I did not grow up thinking that I would be a teacher. It sort of came about after college, after a couple of years doing what I thought I wanted to do. I wasn't loving it and I wanted to do something else. And so I did some soul searching and figured out that teaching was something that I wanted to do. And I was really good at it. I loved teaching. I taught chemistry. And what I loved about teaching was that students left my class knowing they could do hard things, because, the chemistry, when you say chemistry, it creates this visceral reaction in most people's faces. um, and it's like, whoa, but really, for me, it was about making chemistry something that kids could do, would do, and providing them with a lot of resources so that they were able to achieve chemistry. Now, did they all become chemists? No, absolutely not. But the fact that they could leave and say, wow, that chemistry is hard. People will say to me, chemistry is really hard, but I could do it and I did it. And most, if not all, of the students who left my classroom were able to be successful in that class.
To that end.
Yeah. So, and 10 years into doing that, society tells us that, and when you're really good at something, you need to take that next level. And so I applied for like a middle management position in education, and I didn't get it. And it was a really interesting moment for me because I felt like I was a really good teacher. I felt like I was ready for something new. And and I didn't get it. And so I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm just a teacher."
Mm.
And, like, that is how I operated for about the next 8 to 9 years, just thinking like, "Well, I guess this is it for me." And, uh, and that was really hard because when you're a teacher, you really are doing the same thing year after year, changing it up a little bit, but if we think about a general teacher who's spending 30 to 35 years in the same profession, there's not a whole lot difference about their job in 35 years. And there's really not a whole lot of people in life who can sustain something for that long of a time without change.
Mm. Couple of questions that are popping into my head. As you are connecting with your students, let's take a step back into that space, because I think this is where some of the empathy part is going to come into play later. But as you are connecting with those students in trying to make a subject that is generally not as easy intuitively to understand, as you're trying to capture their imagination, open space for them to find a way to connect with the material and the value of what they are learning. How did you do that? How did you make it fun? How did you corral the minds of all the students in your classroom space so that they could have that their own mindset shift of on day one coming in being like, oh, chemistry, to then a few weeks or months later going, I got this. I know what I'm talking about. I can do this. What did that look like as you were living it out as their educator?
I think for me, it was really starting with the hard stuff, not being afraid to say, here we are, we're going to start with this really hard math. I'm going to give you some tools, I'm going to give you some resources, and you're going to be okay. And if you aren't successful, because I think that's the other thing in education and classes, we define success by a grade. And for me, what I would what I would really try and impress on my students is that the grade doesn't define success for you. And what is success is different for everybody.
I love that. I love that for so many reasons, right? Because not every student in whatever subject,
Right.
not every student is going to excel in the ways that the system has set up as defining what is success, what's marker A, B, C, D, E, whatever your markers are. And in that comes a lot of shame, loss of confidence, loss of self-esteem, lots of questioning about, am I smart? And all the things that at a very young age, youth start to internalize about themselves because of these definitions, expectations, and standards. So the fact that you were creating the space that said, let's shift the definition of what success is to something that's more tangible and meaningful is not only a beautiful disruption of the system, but it's also teaching them it's a life skill that they can use moving forward to create their standard for themselves as well in whatever area of life.
Yeah, and what I really loved was it's chemistry happens in a really unique time for so many students. A lot of times students have been able to sort of coast through school. I don't want to say faking it, but really like not really being challenged. And oftentimes, what would happen when they would get to chemistry is that kids would tell me, I don't know how to study. I don't know how to do this. This is really hard for me. And it's not hard because it's chemistry, but it's hard because it's the first time that I've really had to embrace education and embrace my learning for myself.
So many life lessons here, right?
Mhm.
Okay. We could shoot off that path, but I don't want to because I want us to get to a place of moving into peers, not fears, right?
Yeah.
So let's jump to the part of your story where you shared earlier. You had applied for this position. It was not to be at that time. And you spent the next few years in this space thinking, assessing, processing, having your own kind of moments of, is there anything more? Am I worth more? Is there more value to what I can give and do? And asking all of those questions. And so, what I'm assuming you were asking all of those questions, right? What was the moment or experience like for you that caused the shift from the traditional educator role into this starting your LLC? Can you kind of talk us through that part?
Yeah, there were a lot of little moments, but when I started working with a program at my school where I was training students to be leaders, I started to realize that we were choosing students who already had leadership skills. And so because I had felt to myself that I wasn't a leader at one point, I was really wondering in my mind, like, are leaders allowed to make mistakes according to the way I was operating in this program? No, because if students made a mistake, they were put on probation or they were kicked out. And so the answer in that moment was no, leaders can't make mistakes. Um, and then I had a conversation with a student that I saw as a leader and this one individual student didn't want to apply because they didn't see themselves as a leader. And when I pressed, I was like, why aren't you going to apply? I'm not a leader. Why aren't you a leader? I make mistakes. And it wasn't okay for him to say that to me. It was okay for me to be like, yeah, I'm not a leader because I make mistakes, but it wasn't okay for a student to say that to me. And what I had to do was redefine what leadership meant for me and what leadership was to me. And that is where I started to really think about how I wanted to be a leader and how I wanted to train others to be leaders. And I will tell you that for a lot of this time, I still didn't see myself as a leader.
Mm.
I still had a lot of imposter syndrome. I wanted to be part of this class because I knew I wanted to mold kids to be really great, caring, compassionate kids, but I didn't I didn't know that I was really the right person until I was told I wasn't the right person. And that was because I had pulled some of these kids in who were not the perfect students and they were making mistakes. And this was a program for the school that they were able to hold these kids up on this pedestal and tell the rest of the kids, in order to be this kind of a kid, you've got to do all of these things, hoping to help kids strive to be better, but sending a message that you're not good enough. And so when I pulled kids in who, quote unquote, weren't good enough, they made mistakes. And unfortunately, administration felt like it reflected poorly on them. And so COVID, lots of things were happening. I was staying home with my children because they were going to be fully remote, and that was a good time for school to say to me, "Well, since you're not going to be in the building, we're going to have somebody else do this class." And that didn't sit well for me, and that was the moment where I was like, "Okay, well, schools need to redefine leadership. Schools need to empower all kids."
Mhm.
And my definition now for leadership is if you're able to make a decision, and there's not any one person who's not making decisions in their life, if you're making decisions, you're a leader. And just like in any sport, we're all on a path of growth and development on that. Same thing with leadership.
Yes. And when you think about the valuable lessons we learn when we make mistakes or we fail, or we choose an option that has a different consequence. Maybe it's not the intended outcome that we were hoping for and striving for, but it ended up in a different direction. There is such valuable learning that happens in those spaces. And from an education standpoint, because I think you can speak to this given your background, there culturally, there is a perception that mistakes are not something to be celebrated, right? We have these very defined kind of definitions, as you have pointed to and alluded to. We have these defined standards for what success looks like. In this case, what leadership. There was no room in that context for somebody who makes a mistake, and how from an education standpoint that is impacting thousands of young minds across the country on a daily basis. And then it becomes part of like the psyche of that generation, right? And so to redefine, I say all that to applaud you for redefining the definition of leadership so that it is more inclusive, it is embracing, it is genuine, it is authentic, and it's empowering the way that you are doing it through peers, not fears. So thank you for turning what was a difficult challenge, a difficult experience, a loss in ways, turning it into a pathway that is touching hearts in a more authentic way.
I think, it's so interesting to know that, at every decision we have two different directions, maybe more. And for me to know that what I am doing now aligns so much with who I am. It aligns so much with what my core values of empowerment and integrity are, that it feels right. And not that teaching didn't feel right.
Right.
I was struggling. I had reached a moment where there was just nothing but friction for me, because I didn't believe that the only success for a student was an A.
Yeah.
Right. And that is how we define success in high school and in college. Who's the top of the class? Those are the successes, when in reality, the kids in the middle who work really hard to achieve something that never gets acknowledged,
Yeah.
they're the ones that are successful in their future lives.
Absolutely. And holding space. It's so important nowadays to hold space for all of it and to celebrate and acknowledge the hard work, the achievement, the resiliency that comes in to sticking with something, giving it your all, like recognizing there's different modalities, there's different ways of learning. I feel like we're just sort of scratching the surface now of understanding the spectrum and scope of how young people and children process, take in information, and recognizing that our systems are set up on tracks for a very narrow sort of scope of that. And so while we could go down that road, we're not here to go down that road. But I celebrate you because the disruption that has been caused opens space for this pathway that you are using to shape the minds, hearts of so many youth that you come into contact with. So share with us what you do through Peers, Not Fears.
So my favorite thing is to help a school solve problems.
Mhm.
And what, again, another misnomer or misunderstanding is that we can't use students to help us solve problems because they don't know or because they don't understand the challenges. But in fact, from my interviews with students on my podcast, I have found that their ideas are incredible and they're really actually pretty easy to put in place. So I would ask students what was working for them in education and what were some challenges, and their simplistic advice made me a better teacher. And so why not engage students in the process of what we're facing as challenges in schools? And I know there's a lot of fear that, they're not trained. They don't have the background, they don't have the skills. They shouldn't be hearing these things, maybe, in terms of self-harm or bullying and things, like maybe we don't want them to hear that so that they won't do it, or whatever our ideas are behind why we don't want to engage with students are all misinformed. So what I will do is I will engage with all the stakeholders to find out what they believe the challenges are. Parents, administrators, teachers, students, school boards. If there's another entity, I'll engage with them and I'll ask, what are you seeing as challenges? And then I'll take the ones that are similar or the biggest problem, and I will plop myself into a study hall, right? The challenge of all schools. What do we do with study halls? Kids are at different places. They don't need that time. They need that time. So I'll go in and I'll use that time with study hall, which is also such a random assortment of students. Sometimes it's mixed grades, sometimes it's mixed abilities. So there's no like, oh, I applied for that class or whatever. It's a mixture, and it's a really good mixture. So we'll go in, I'll talk to them, I'll ask them, or I'll share the problem, and then I'll ask them what are some solutions to that problem. And we'll talk about the solutions. Maybe we'll pick one or two, and then this is the best part. We talk about the problems that might be caused if we implement those solutions. So we're not like, here's this great idea, let's go run with it. No, we're going to think about what are the consequences if we were to put that into place. And of course, there's still the fun that is leadership building is really fun. It's all about teamwork. It's all about building communication strategies together. And so you could take a game where I give them a ball and they have to come up with a pattern, and then they have to toss that ball in the fastest way they possibly can without any like guidelines, except it has to be in that same order. And so they have to figure out, what are we going to do to change it? What defines success for us? Like, is that 1 minute ability, to get it done, is that good enough? Or do we want to try and do it better? Can we do it better? How can we do it better? So it's all of that work while focusing on the problems that are happening in schools. It doesn't end there though, because I've just empowered a small group of students. What are they going to do now? They're going to take what they've learned and they're going to go into, I don't know, homeroom and advisory, the lunchroom, the group of kids that they sit with at lunch, and they're going to do the same thing. Let's have this. Here's this challenge. Here's the solution we came up with. What problems do you think would happen if we put that solution into play? Let's do this activity together. And so it's train the trainer. I can't be the only one with the knowledge, right? Just like in my classroom, I wasn't the one with the information. You too have information. We just have to access it.
Talk to me a little bit about the role of empathy and the role of uncovering bias as you are having these conversations, as schools or organizations are partnering with you to open space for these discussions and facilitate conversations around growth, change, problem, solution. Talk to me a little bit about the role of empathy and bias in that.
Yeah. I think for me, bias really came up when I was having conversations with students on my podcast and not realizing the things that I was doing in my classes came from biases I didn't know I had, and how we all have that memory of a teacher that did something, probably didn't even know they did it, that has stuck with us, and we still carry it to this day, right? And it was maybe that teacher had a bad day and they just sort of transferred that energy out to the classroom. And it happened to be a day where I was really vulnerable and it hurt me. And I still have that. We also have that teacher that changed the direction of our lives, right? And so we have both of those memories. We have both of those teachers in our hearts, for good or for bad. We as teachers have a lot of power. And I am not saying that we can't use that power or we shouldn't use that power, but we need to acknowledge that we have that power. And that is where empathy has to come in. I see my students, maybe I see them for 45 minutes a day, every day a week. Maybe I see them for a different clunk of time, but I don't know everything about them. And I don't know what they're bringing into the classroom, just like that teacher who maybe had a bad day and transferred that energy. We don't know everything about them. And so coming to the classroom, coming to the place of work in a space of, and I love this, I think it's Project Adventure uses the idea of challenge by choice. If I don't give you a choice to engage, then I am forcing you to do something, whether it's for your own good or not. I'm still forcing you, and there's no good outcome of making somebody do something that they don't want to do. So if I go into a group and I say, let's do this activity, I know how fun it is, but this child in the back is like, no, thank you. I'm not going to make them do it. I'm going to show them that I'm here in a space and I want them to engage. And engagement looks different for everybody. And I just think that that's the place, that's the piece that we all need to know, is that things look different for everybody. And there is no system that can be a one size fits all.
Exactly. And as you are working with youth of many different ages, I'm assuming, and backgrounds in all capacities, this space holding for empathy, this space holding for identifying bias, this space holding for learning from mistakes, this space holding for showing up as a human being who has lived at whatever age, this entire range of experience, and is bringing that into every space that they go into. And then how do they learn how to navigate relationships with other people who are doing the same exact thing in this journey of life, right? And so it is a beautiful gift that you are using, the way that you're using it, in that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when they are in positions of power, when they're in positions of leadership, when they're in positions that have influence beyond their own capacity and autonomy, it's going to look like a very different world because of what's happening in that space right now with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that I really like to talk about is there are different ways to lead.
Yes.
And you know, if I am at the top, which is a very familiar leadership model, I'm at the top and I'm telling the people down below what to do, they still have the ability to make a decision, right? I can still see myself as a leader, but if I'm at the top and I'm preventing these others from making decisions out of fear, out of sort of I can't even think, like where you're just sort of like intimidation, that's the word, intimidation, then my top is going to stay stagnant. I'm not going to expand. I'm not going to grow. I might feel powerful, I might feel in control, but at the end of the day, I think we all want to do more. We all want to grow. And that is not how anybody really achieves more.
Yeah. Now, Lorraine, you have a passion for providing and opening opportunities for children at younger and younger ages to step into a leadership capacity, their leadership capacity. Can you talk a little bit about that? What that looks like, where that comes from for you, and how you are doing that in your space?
So I think for me, being a teacher and working with students and seeing, you know, that hurdle that a student can either walk up to or try and jump over, and giving them that step up to jump over successfully and then moving that step away really became apparent to me when I became a parent. You know, I made a lot of mistakes as a teacher early on because I didn't have the empathy. I didn't really know what it was like outside of my classroom. You know, I knew what I was as a student, I knew what I was told in my teacher ed prep classes, but I didn't know what it was like to be a student of today. And so, what I really like to do is let students tell me, you know, let them say, Miss Connell or Lorraine, like I'm an athlete too. I really want to give my all to basketball this season. I don't know how also I'm supposed to do chemistry, AP US history, AP English. I don't know how to manage everything. And it takes courage for a kid to say that. And I don't think any student really had the courage when I was in classrooms with them. I knew, like, when it was production week for the drama clap, I knew, I was like, okay, guys, you know, give me what you got when you got it. You know, I wasn't going to put that on them. But I didn't have a lot of kids who had the courage to speak up and say, I'm overwhelmed. And I think I'd like more teachers, I'd like more students to open that dialogue.
Yeah. And what was the shift? What you're seeing it now, and there's still a desire to see more of it, but what do you think some of the catalysts were that have opened space for that response, that reaction, that vulnerability to be happening now?
Well, I think asking.
Yes.
You know, I think if I'm not asking, I'm not
Yes.
ever going to get that information from students. And so I really love the podcast that I'm hosting because I'm asking those questions. And I, I don't have a whole lot of people listening. I said something to somebody the other day. I was like, you know, I started this podcast because we don't listen to student voice. And guess what? Nobody's listening to my podcast. But I don't think there's, you know, I think there's truth in that, is that we don't validate student voice because I think because we feel like we have to be in control of a classroom, and it really has to come from someone above me, right?
Mhm.
So I, as a teacher, have to give my students the space to ask. I have to be vulnerable. I have to have the courage to say, well, tell me what I could do better. And not all of us have the confidence to ask that question. We don't know what we're going to get for an answer. And if we're not sure that the answer is going to be what we want, we just don't ask that question. And, and if I'm doing something that is hard and difficult for my students, I have to make a change. And if I don't feel like I have the support to make that change,
Mm.
then I might not make that change. So there's all these levers that are in play to get us to that point where kids have the courage, kids have the space to be able to be heard.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, that's it.
Mm. To those parents, to those mamas who are listening right now and who are recognizing that there are times that their child is overlooked because they just in one way or another don't fit the model, the definition, the projection of what leader might be, or success might be. What words of encouragement do you have for that mama who is doing all that she can do to love on her baby, encourage her baby to continue being the unique, wonderful, incredible, sparkly being that they are? But what encouragement do you have for that mama?
The first thing that I would say to that mom is recognize your own leadership right now, because you are already guiding and nurturing and growing that little being into something else. And for me, not to acknowledge that being a mom was a leader was not healthy and was not good for me and for my children.
Mhm.
And the other piece that I would like to say to that mom is you have a lot of power to see and hear and be with your child, and don't always try and fix it, right? A lot of times, one of our children will come to us and they will just want to tell you a story. And so often, as leaders, we try and fix what's going on. And so my words of encouragement is to, one, ask them what they want to do about it. What do they want you to do about it? And what are their goals? What are their hopes for the next day, in 5 years?
Mhm.
And like that, for me, asking what do I want in 5 years really diffuses what's happening right now. So those would be the suggestions that I would have.
Okay. And to those women who are listening, who are in the education space, who are feeling that tension, what words of encouragement or advice do you have for them?
So funny that you asked me that question. I would encourage anyone to get a coach. As a teacher, 10 years in, when I didn't get that position, I didn't value myself enough to know, one, I had the money to buy a coach or pay a coach. I didn't feel like I was good enough that I needed a coach. I think a coach would have really helped me see who I was
Mhm.
in a way that I most certainly could not see who I was. And I would tell any teacher
Mhm.
who is feeling that friction, is feeling that frustration, loves being in the classroom, but hates everything else, which is where I was when I left.
Yeah.
You are more than a teacher. You
Yeah.
can do more than just teach. Teaching has provided you so many skills that are transferable in so many ways. And whether you're a teacher or not, if you are a parent, you have a ton of skills. So, wherever you are in your journey, don't sell yourself short. Don't define leadership by society. Don't define leadership by the way we have always defined leader, as a title, as somebody who is perfect, as somebody who was born with those skills. You can still develop leadership skills. There are so many skills that we learned as parents, as we learned as adults, that are really coming into play, and we can keep building on those. A leader really shouldn't stop growing. And that for me is the advice that I wish somebody had told me.
Mm. For those who are listening that want to reach out and work with you, where can they find you? Where can they go? And what types of services do you offer?
So my website, Peers Not Fears, and there are dashes in between, because if you smush those words together, it's Pierce Not. And my husband thought that was really funny. So I was like, I don't want anybody thinking that. So it's Peers Not Fears. The services that I really truly love to provide are services for teenagers. Teenagers are in high school. So basic leadership skills, advanced leadership skills. And really, if you think about the kids who are leaving home for the first time, maybe they're going to college, maybe they're going to the armed services, maybe they're just going to start a job. Many of them have lost skills that they learned when they were 4 or 5, like making friends, knowing who they are, because they've been the same person for the last 18 years. And so there's a lot that we need to learn before we leave home. Knowing what self-care looks like, knowing when we are in a healthy place, what it looks like, and when we start to slip.
Mhm.
Those are really critical things to know before we leave a space where everybody knows us. And so that I have a program for kids who are leaving that phase of their life. I do offer professional development for educators, and that is really the learning that I have gained from working with students. I like to sort of define it as that pre-diversity, equity, and inclusion work, right? So diversity, equity, and inclusion work can be hard, and it is hard. But if you come at it from a place of understanding why we're doing it, it's not as hard to do it. And so what I like to do is just sort of open the door to knowing why we're doing the work. Why is it so hard for us to understand kids who are identifying with different pronouns? Why is it so hard for us to understand transitions for kids? And so I open the door for that conversation, and you're in a safe place. You're with people who feel the same questions. And as a teacher, we don't want to do harm. So we don't want to ask the student that question because we don't know what the answer will be. And we also don't understand why we don't know this stuff. And so there's a lot of fear, hence the name Peers, not fears. There's so much fear in our lives with the people that we interact with. I just want to dissolve those fears and bring people together and build community.
And that you are doing every single day, right?
Yes.
Lorraine, I can't believe our time has flown by so quickly. And while there are so many other avenues and pathways we could have explored, I want to thank you.
Thank you
For sharing. I know this is just the teeny tiny tip of the iceberg to these conversations and the work that you do. And I want to thank you for all that you are doing in the ways that you are investing in the next generation and the generation after that, in reframing and disrupting and empowering and opening space for vulnerability, for honesty, for authenticity, for acceptance. It's a beautiful thing that you are doing. And what touches my heart is knowing that the life lessons that are coming into their hearts, the experience at such young ages is going to change culture. It's
Yes.
going to disrupt and change things as they continue to age and move into spaces that are, because of their presence, it will expand out into those spaces. So thank you for the work that you are doing.
Thank you for having me and having this conversation, because this is where I love being, talking about this work.
For those of you who are viewing and or listening, all of the information on how you can get in touch with Lorraine will be in the caption below. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. And Lorraine, thank you for giving of your time today.
Bye.
Bye now.